Now? Yes. Okay. Like magic. Okay, thanks for coming, everyone. My name's Ed, and Penny and Kel. We're convening this session. And as you can see, video here motivating this, Arctic sea ice, as you hopefully all know, is declining quite rapidly. But this is really fueling an interest in Arctic maritime activity. Again, high volumes of traffic and new actors that are taking operations in the Arctic, and increasing length of the navigation season. But the Arctic is still a hostile place to operate. There are lots of cryosphere hazards and extreme weather that can be really problematic for shipping. The Arctic's also changing quite a lot, so we're seeing quite a lot of difference in the way that the sea ice is behaving. Particularly, there's quite a shift to first-year ice, which is a bit more mobile. So that is creating challenges for existing operations. So we need to ensure that what we do in the Arctic is safe and has minimal environmental impact. So this session, we're going to explore some of the types of environmental data needed to ensure that maritime operations in the Arctic are safe in a rapidly changing Arctic. In particular, we're interested in the role of sort of trusted data and how people trust data sets to help them to support vital decisions in the Arctic. So I'm going to hand over to Kel to say a few more words about how this is going to go. Oh,
I think I have my own arrangement.
Special headset.
Yeah. Thank you very much. My name is Kjeld Quiscott, and I'm with the Danish Meteorological Institute. So I'll be moderating this session on use of ice information in ice-covered waters. So just a little bit of outline of how the session is going to run. First, there will be a joint presentation by Penny Wagner and myself, where we are presenting giving a little outline of the ice operations going on at the Greenland Ice Service and Met Norway. So secondly, next we will have Ed back on stage here, and he will give us some insights to the new program the UK Met Office is running on advancing Arctic capabilities. Then we will have Dina Abdel Fattah from Met Norway, giving aspects of use of ice information from a research perspective. We have Duke Snyder, who's a captain and ice navigator from Martic Polar, and he's Canadian. I believe he's sitting in Mexico at the moment.
He's truly international.
Yeah, and welcome, Duke. It's nice to have you here, bearing in mind what time of the day it is in your part of the world. And our last panelist will be Christian Haas from the Alfred Wegener Institute. And Christian, you've been leading, I don't know how many polar expeditions in Arctic and Arctic waters, also involving the German research vessel Polarstern. So we will hear various aspects from you. But what is it that we will dive into today? It's basically how to make sound decisions at sea when you're operating in marine environment in ice-covered waters or near ice-covered waters. So how to make the right decision? What is needed? What is the right information at the right time for decision support? Is that what type of products, level of details, timeliness, content, parameters? How is it going into this process of making a sound decision for moving forward? Is that, Ed already alluded to, trusted data, authoritative data, other types of data that is needed, and what is the training aspects that's going into this? Those are the aspects that we'll dive into. So we will have a few short presentations, contributions from the panelists, and then we'll open up for a discussion, and we will have more questions that we need to answer here. So that's basically the outline of the next 85 minutes, I believe. So now we will dive into it. So we'll start with a brief presentation from Met Norway and DMI on ice service operations, and I'll hand over to Penny for the first part of the presentation.
Thank you. Oh. Would you do this?
I just waved it around and the guy back sort of.
Testing? Okay. Thank you very much and for a very, very nice introduction. So I also want to say that we specifically actually organized this so this could be more of an informal conversation. So we're hoping that we can open up for a really dynamic conversation. Is the video still playing? No? Not yet? Can we actually put the video on really quick? I just want to talk about it before I start the presentation. So I'm Penny Wagner. I'm the head of the Operational CI Service at the Norwegian Meteorological Institute. Our office is based here in Tromsø. And I wanted to give you an overview on what the mandate is and what we do for the operational ice services. So if we have the video up right now. I want us just to take a look at this. So we know, we've heard about the ice is melting, the Arctic is getting more dynamic. But what I want you to actually see here is when we're talking about how we know the ice is being lost, but we actually need to also look at what kind of ice is being lost. We're actually replacing a lot thicker, older ice with more younger, first-year ice, and then we're seeing this every year, these change in sea ice regimes. So what happens with this is actually very difficult to monitor and forecast in near real time and the short term, and also strategic, because we have this thing called snow cover on sea ice. If we didn't have the snow cover on sea ice, then it would be different, but this really strains operations on how we use satellites. We only really use satellites to monitor this in an operational kind of way, because that's what we have. So I think what we really want to know from the practitioner perspective is how this challenges you as well, because we're seeing this growing need and this dynamic condition happening more and more every year. So I want to dive into a really short overview on what we do, and then just kind of what goes into what we do. Okay, so we can go ahead and start the presentation now. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so we can go on the next slide. Or, it's here. Is that nice? There we go. Okay. So we're actually mandated to provide ice information similar to weather forecasters. They put out, you're looking at the weather forecast, you're looking at the rain cloud or the sun, and you're wanting to make a very practical decision. This is what our ice analysts do, and we're actually mandated with the International Maritime Organization and the World Meteorological Organization to put out very standard information, and this is to support navigational safety, life and safety, and it's also to provide sea ice and iceberg information. So what we do for the Met Norway Ice Service, we put out ice information between Greenland and Russia, and it's Monday through Friday. We put out Arctic ice information, and then for the Antarctic, we do this through October through April. So we also use a variety of different types of satellites. Our analysts put together the latest and greatest satellites, and they put out an ice information on a daily basis. So when ship operators or even those that are working on communities, they're looking at ice in the fjords, they're trying to make a very practical decision whether or not they should go in this area, they should stay away from it. And so this is something that is very critical to what we do. I'm going to hand this over so you can get an overview on the Greenland Ice Service, and then we'll come back to you.
My own. Yeah, the Greenland Ice Service, we have a similar setup like the Norwegian Ice Service. So the key here is really near real-time access to various types of satellite data. And it's not just satellite data, it's high resolution, it's the synthetic aperture radar, where we have a number of satellites supplementing each other, all coming in and being handled, automated, making them available for our ice analysts so they can produce ice information that is standardized and can go out to the marine community. So, and at the moment we are dealing with about 10 different satellites that's rolling. Some are providing low resolution data, others are providing very high resolution information in very targeted regions. So at the lower right, I've least shown one of the straits that we're monitoring with high resolution data. So, and if this strait is blocked by by iceberg is really critical to shipping. So, and if they have to turn around, and so it's not really a good situation. So, but the colorful product in the middle is really one of the standard products that we're producing. The regional sea ice charts targeted where the ships are coming into this area. So southern tip of Greenland, that's a key area. Another key area we're having is central parts of the west coast of Greenland, where we've seen more and more ships over the past decade. So the regional ice charts, we're producing more than 1,000 charts, targeted shipping on an annual basis. Just to give you a little overview of how shipping is actually looking in the North Atlantic. So we have here a map showing the AIS tracks for February 24 and again in August 24. And you see there's a dramatic change. So and more or less defined by the position of the sea ice sets. The sea ice regime of the east coast of Greenland is dominated by multi-sea ice from the Arctic Ocean. So only icebreakers and other ships with very high ice class can go into these areas, and they don't go in there in the winter time. So there's a huge annual variability in shipping, and what we've seen over the past 10 years is also an increase in shipping. So ships are really taking advantage of the shoulder seasons. So you can say that sea ice is the obstacle, but we're also dealing with hazards at sea, and we're also dealing with icebergs in our part of the world. So on the left you have the rough outline of the iceberg distribution, but it varies very much. So we have for this area we are producing an iceberg limit in collaboration with our colleagues in Canada and the US, simply to serve transatlantic shipping. Most of these ships, they just want to avoid any ice, stay south of the limit. So what we've seen in recent years is that more and more tabular icebergs from northeast Greenland are coming into the East Greenland current and drifting south. We had an example this summer where we had a tabular berg 4 by 2 kilometers that drifted south of the southern tip of Greenland, Cape Farewell, and split into numerous pieces and became a major hazard for shipping. What I would also say, also an attraction, because there were several cruise ships in the area. So and they were advised about the situation. So and they make some sound decisions that they could go close and give the passengers a once in a lifetime experience. So I'll head back to you, Penny.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So I just want to go into a little bit of the data that we use. So this is there's a lot of data out there that we're actually not using. It's very resource intensive to put out information, and I think, so from the operational ice service perspective, we work really closely together internationally, but we also have a really good connection with our users. You can see that we have very different users for our areas. For Met Norway, we actually have a very, very wide spread of different types of users who want to go in the ice, who want to stay away from the ice, who rely on very precise information. Whereas Greenland, they have a lot of communities all around, and they have different types of ice, and also a mixture of older and new ice coming down the Fram Strait, and also working on the east and west side of this. So this is something we really have to make sure that we have best practices and we work very well, closely aligned together. So just to let you know, so as you see on the right-hand side of the chart with the input data, what our analysts do is they combine in situ data, lots of satellite data, they overlay everything, and they provide a value added into this. And this actually allows us to provide routine information and have continuity, but also to have redundancy. So in the case that something happens with one satellite, we can replace it with something else. Or actually what we have with this, that the analysts are able to really understand the regional and seasonal changes of the ice, and this is something that's really important for us. So to do ice charts right now, is still on a manual basis. All ice services do this on a manual basis because the QC component is so important. So you can see we combine all the data, put it in a database. There is a pre-processing that is done. It's the calibration with the satellites. This is all put into a geospatial software, and we actually use a certain format that allows us it to be scalable. So not only can we have sea ice concentration in there, we can also put ice type, we can put ice features, ridges, leads, when available. So this is actually very good for mariners. They like this, and we have a very long history and legacy of working with them, and we really have a good understanding of the technical capabilities they have on the ships to make sure that we actually provide the right information. And then to the far end with the value added, that's where the ice analysts come in and the human input comes in. What the ice analysts provide is they can see the history of the ice, they can follow this. And this is something that has been really challenged by automation. We really need automation, but the thing is, so this is why we're actually not using the data we have right now. And now we know that in the next few years, we're actually going to have more satellites available. We're going to be able to provide better information. We're going to have more processing power. But we're not even there right now, so we really want to prepare for more. We really want to expand on this. And I want to bring your attention to what the value added that the input is. We make sure that the products that go out are fit for purpose. So this builds trusts with our end users, and this allows us to work together. But now we're really at a point where we need to expand our information. We need to keep up with the changing ice conditions, and we really want to take advantage of all the other information that's out there. And we really want to get feedback from the practitioner perspective on how you see this. So I think this is actually the last slide. This is just an overview of some of the standards that ice services follow, but it's really about that we share best practices, and it is standardized. It's actually not just providing ice information on a daily basis. And what is also most important, with the absence of observations for sea ice, the ice charts actually act as a ground truth. They're used in the research community to validate sensors for CalVal, because we just don't have routine observations to do this. So we want to find the balance going forward of maintaining this archive, but also providing a lot better and more frequent information at the same time.
Thank you so much, Penny.
Thanks, and I would like
I think you deserve a hand.
Yeah. Thank you.
We have time for one quick question, but there will be plenty of chances after the presentations, also from the panelists. So, all right, I will hand over to Ed Blockley from the UK Met Office, lead scientist. So, and he will give us a brief on the new UK Met Office Arctic Capability Program that's making very significant steps and progress these years. So over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Kel. Yes, so I'm Ed Blockley. I lead the Polar Climate Group at the Met Office, and we're in charge of sea ice modelling and polar climate, but I'm also leading a substantial piece of work in this new Advancing Arctic Capabilities Programme I'm going to give you a brief overview of, very brief. So, not going to spend much time on this, but as we're all aware, the Arctic is warming considerably more than the rest of the world. The IPCC there say at least, it's very likely at least more than twice. Lots of numbers you can hear, sometimes 3 times, sometimes 7 times. Depends on how you decide on your baseline, but it's at least twice, and that picture is showing increase in the Arctic, very red there. And of course this means that the sea ice is melting, and this plot is just showing decadal mean seasonal cycles of Arctic sea ice, and in the middle there, contrast between what we had in 1980, which is in the white, and what we saw in 2019 in the orange at the end of this period. Just making that point, and so there's quite a lot more activity happening in the Arctic. At the same time, the UK are getting quite interested in the Arctic. We've had a number of different policies and reports over the last few years. This is a picture of a few, and these have really underlined the UK position that the Arctic is critical to UK interests. And particularly I have this quote from our current Arctic policy framework, Looking North, which states that the UK aims for a prosperous Arctic where any economic and commercial development is achieved in a way that's safe, responsible and sustainable. So this is sort of underlining our motivation for our program. So this is the Advancing Arctic Meteorological and Oceanographic Capabilities and Services Program. We just say Advancing Arctic Capabilities, or AAC for short, but it is a multi-year program funded by UK government, and it's funded under the International Science Partnerships Fund. So we are very interested in international collaboration. And really our goal is to improve, for Met Office and partners, to improve environmental data provision for the Arctic. There are a number of strands to the program. I can't go through all of them, but we are doing numerical modelling. We do a lot of modelling and forecasting. We're also doing some space weather work, which we won't talk about out here, but it's important for communications. We're also looking at ways that we can improve observations, or the number of observations that we take in the Arctic and how we contribute to the global Arctic observing. And we're also trying to improve our capability of our meteorologists and our products and services that we provide for the Arctic region. So I just have a few examples of the kind of things that we're doing. Not going to go through everything because we've got quite a lot of work happening. But for example, something we're doing here at the top, we're tracking polar lows and just coming up with products focused around the risk of polar lows and just checking how our model and system perform polar lows. We're also looking at the impact. At the bottom left there is understanding the impact of observations for our forecast systems. We're actually taking observations of setting up space weather observations there on the top right, which look very UFO-like. And we're also looking at algorithms for marine icing and shipping products, things like that. We're also working on our modelling for the Arctic. So we're developing coupled Arctic regional modelling system, which is the traditional atmosphere, land, ocean, and sea ice couple model, but we're also now including waves and tides. And I won't go through all of these graphics, so they're just examples of some of the things we're looking at. For example, tidal amphidromes down the bottom there, or wave ice interaction on the left. But it's not just about short-range forecasting, and perhaps less relevance for this session, but we're also doing interested in Arctic climate services. So this is a product that we recently produced on future sea level for the Arctic. This figure on the left is actually for Barentsburg and Svalbard, and showing projections out to 2300. But we've done this for a selection of different ports across the Arctic, which you can see on a map here. And these kind of infographics, we call them sea level infographics. So we explain on these what are the factors that are affecting sea level, and what the uncertainty is. But also, we've chosen these 6 different ports around the Arctic just to demonstrate the kind of differences that you see across the region, because the locality of the Greenland ice sheet makes quite a big difference for what are the local projections of sea level. So just my final slide here is really just to motivate why we're here. We're exploring use cases for Arctic Met Ocean and climate advice. We're interested, this session is about maritime activity, but we're interested in maritime, but we're also interested in land, air navigation. We're also interested in subsurface communications and space weather. So keen to talk about anything. We're a range of users of the Met Office, military, civilian, government and industry, and we cover a range of timescales from sort of nowcasting and tomorrow's weather right out to some of the decadal and centennial climate projections, like such as the sea level, one I just showed you. So really there, the key message in the middle is that we're interested in your experience as people working and operating and living in the Arctic, and really keen to understand how people can use environmental data to support crucial decision making in this region. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so close. Thank you so much, Ed. Any short questions before we move on to Ed?
University of Aberdeen. We've started working with your colleagues at the Met Office, but obviously you're just covering sea ice from this perspective, but what have you seen in terms of changes to weather across the Arctic in terms of sea state and extreme weather events?
There's quite a... One of the motivations for this session is extreme weather events. So we're very interested in polar lows, for example, and so we are, at the moment, we're looking at tracking polar lows from our model. We're very interested in how those are changing. I think there are generally the extremes are becoming more extreme and a bit more common. I think we've, and so it's crucial that we're able to provide good advice on those things. We are, one of the things that we're hoping to look at a bit more is how those extremes are changing. We haven't really looked at that yet on this program, but it's very important. And waves, you know, we know there's a lot more wave activity in the Arctic. As the sea ice declines, you get a lot more wind-ocean interaction, and so you get a lot more waves.
Thank you so much, Ed. Yeah, making decisions at sea is not just a question of weather or sea ice or whatever icing. It's the whole combination, the whole cocktail you have to deal with at all times. So I think that's what's basically the point of it from Ed here. So, but in the interest of time, I think we will move on to the first of our panelists. So first, I will hand over the microphone to Dina Abdel Fattah from Met Norway. She's a scientist, and my understanding is that all the processes and considerations going into the decision making has really been key in the work and research that you've been doing for a long time. So please give a brief introduction of yourself and your approach to this question. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Dina Abdel Fattah, and I'm at the Norwegian Meteorological Institute. And I wear a very interesting hat, since I'm an interdisciplinary scientist. I have a background in glaciology, computer science, and also social science. So this question about decision-making often comes up when we talk about our products and how they're used and what people need for information. But we forget that we're talking about humans most of the time, which really is one of the most complex machinery out there. The information that we process on a daily basis is insurmountable. So when we talk then about how people use our information products, we forget that often, from a science perspective, people take many different factors into account before they actually use a piece of information. It's not just the data that we're providing, but it's the whole context of decision making and that human process that gets underlooked or overlooked sometimes. So if moving forward, especially when we talk about context of extreme and hazardous events, people are not only looking at that piece of information, not only about sea ice, not only about extreme weather, but actually the whole context. Have they eaten that day? Are they stressed? Do they have other things going on that maybe aren't getting their full attention? That is part of their decision framework. So then we have to think about how our products can fit into this human mold and make basically space that they're not competing with other priorities or other decision factors. So I think that part of the social element we often overlook from a science side, but we really have to make that something that we consider about how easy is our product not only to be accessed, but actually be uptaken amongst all the other decision contexts that people are facing on a daily basis. So that brings me to my second point, that there is truly an information overload in this day and age. And in the same way, it's not about that we just have too much information, but it's also that vetting process that we heard about from the previous moderators and presenters. How do you actually know this piece of information is one to use or not to use? And especially when we're talking about a hazard context or, a risk-taking or assessment, you need to know with really good certainty that this is something that will be reliable in the end. So I want to give something to give us some context that we actually all have a similar way, a product in our back pocket at all times, our phone. And how many apps are out there, right? How do you choose which app to download? You're not going to go and look through every single thing if you want a new app to kind of manage your finances. You're going to go by word of mouth, advertisement, your previous experiences. That's how you kind of filter out information. So again, it's not that it's the best possible product, but it's a product that other people have used, that you trust those users. I'll talk about that next. That information kind of intermediary, and this is really important in this world because we just can't simply process everything that's out there. So that element of trust is very, very, very hard to build and incredibly easily to break. So that's something also that we have to think about, that these long-standing relationships with Met services for now hundreds of years around the world, these are agencies that people have, at least in some sense, a long-standing relationship with. So especially when we talk about new products coming from the private or research industry, if people don't know the information provider, it's really difficult then to say, this product, I can trust it. So it's more likely, even if something were to come out from Met Service, it may not be perfect, but it's a trusted provider. That kind of helps in that overstepping that trust-building process. But as I mentioned, it's very easy to break. So if something were to happen, it's really easy then to then say, oh, we're never using that again because you had one very potentially terrible experience with it. So that really causes a caution from a science perspective. If we're now facing a very dynamically changing Arctic, lots of uncertainty about the future, how then can we also build that trust when we are also learning about this process? And it's not an easy question to answer. But I think that's something to bring up, that information and openness to really discuss. We're not fully certain, but we can talk with you about the uncertainty. That's much better than saying this has 10, 20, 30% uncertainty. What does that mean then for people? So I think really opening up that dialogue, even if you're not fully certain about the validity or the accuracy of these tools, is going to be incredibly important to build and maintain trust. But I think I want to bring an example to the room, even though I represent the Met Service, but Windy.com is for me a really fascinating product that around the world has just been used by many, many communities, especially indigenous communities. So there's something about that intuition, ease of use, but also that something is reliable enough, even if it's reliably inaccurate. Because then people can actually learn how to work with it, even though it might not be totally correct. So often we hear from especially indigenous communities that, we know Windy isn't perfect in this way, but we've learned how to work around it, right? Because it's reliably inaccurate enough that people can kind of create a new kind of paradigm around. So I think that reliableness is actually much more important than accuracy sometimes, because that expectation, you want to make a decision or base a framework on something, you have to have that trust that it's reliable. And that can be both, not a matter of accuracy, but that you can at least expect what's to come from that. So I think also we often push, especially in the meteorology world, to have the best, most reliable forecast. But that's not often what we really need to be striving for when we talk about these hazard contexts. We just need to be able to provide enough information for people to use. So then lastly, then how to bring this together, and especially when we talk about now changing sea ice and maritime activity. And we heard the question about extreme weather events, and this is more from the social perspective again, but that when we see things over and over again, they're not extreme, right? They become this new normal, and we also build a complacency. So often now, if you look at really any weather service or any sea ice forecast, there is the yellow and orange. It's almost our new baseline, right? So people aren't going to really take that as something extreme or something to caution because we just see it so much. So our thresholds for what is extreme are increasing, which means that when we actually have to push out the red alert, people may not be ready to be prepared because we have built now a baseline that we're very familiar with uncertainty, with hazards, with risk. So that also really pushes us from our own side as information providers as what do we want really people to take action on and to make that actually in a way that people can see it as a threat or that they are able to take that up because our baseline for pain, as you would maybe go to the doctor from, where are you from 1 to 10? We're at an operational 6 for most parts. So we really have to think about, can we reevaluate how we can push out forecasts? So this really comes into the point that you had mentioned about who is now that increasing activity in the Arctic. We've had a really long presence from people operating who are really well. Intuition is also built from previous experiences, so they know potentially how to act. But this voyeurism in the Arctic is really what our concern is for, especially sea ice and how it's dynamic and changing. So when you actually bring in new users that aren't familiar with the context, those are really a concerning, who aren't operating on that same level of yellow and orange as a baseline. It's going to be much more difficult to reach out to them. So we can't have a cookie cutter, one-size-fits-all approach because many people have different experiences now working with sea ice, and that also is going to be a concern moving forward. So I'm looking forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dina. And Dina will be on the panel in a short while. So thank you so much. So our next panelist will be an online panelist, Duke Snyder, Maritime Polar Captain and Ice Navigator. Duke, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation, though sad I couldn't be there in person.
Hi, Duke. It's fantastic to have you here. And, well, I can see you are not on a ship, so... and thank you so much for joining us. I know it's in the middle of the night in your place. I hope you're in a nice place in Mexico, right?
I am. Just a short stop before I head down to the Antarctic for 6 weeks.
Yeah, excellent. So once again, thank you so much for joining us at this weird time of day. But you have seen the presentations, you have heard the first input from Dina, and you are one of the experts that have actually been in the ice, going into the ice, and build up the routine of making sound and wise decisions on the bridge of a ship, whether to stop, move forward, move left or right. So maybe you can share us a little more insights on the processes you are going through when making those decisions. I believe that there are various scales involved in this and various data sources. But over to you, Duke. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Kel. Well, to start with, I think one of the things that I have to point out follows up on what Dina was actually talking about. We've seen a huge change in the level of experience in seagoing users in particular. 20 years ago, ships operating in the Arctic were what we used to term the usual suspects, operators that had built their experience over decades on the bridge in various ice regimes, had those years of experience, developed the decision-making capabilities, the knowledge of what they were looking at, and the knowledge of interpreting the data. But over the last couple of decades, that's beginning to change for two reasons. One has been pointed out by all of you. Global climate change is changing the ice conditions, in many ways opening up areas to shipping that had previously not been opened and seasons, broadening that breadth of experience in the mariners. A second part is that the type of individual is changing. With the polar code coming in, many thought that the requirements for training would narrow down and identify the capabilities, but polar code training has not, in fact, now that we've been at it since 2016, given us a pool of additionally skilled ice navigators. It's actually sent a lot of people onto ships into the polar regions who think they have the knowledge because they've attended a course, but don't. So that brings me to, I think, one of the biggest pieces that we see now is that the difference between an experienced ice navigator and a non-experienced ship operator, both in the Arctic, on the one side of the scale, those of us with decades know what we're looking at, know what we need, know how to make those decisions. But on the other end are those that don't understand the products that are being put out there, let alone what they're looking at. So that puts a challenge on the ice services and the providers. The third piece of this is the plethora of, I'll call it non-ice service products that are starting to come out. Weather routing services, which were pretty good at predicting weather and providing ship routing information, have now started using AI to produce nominally ice charts for their users. The ice charts are usually based solely on passive microwave information that doesn't have the resolution, doesn't have the detail that we need. So we're seeing charts that an experienced ice navigator intuitively knows are not as accurate compared to what we're getting from NMI, DMI, or Canadian Ice Service. The experienced quality operator, knowing the difference of what you're looking at is key. When we burrow down further into it, what do we need for decisions? Well, Kel, Penny, Ed, you've heard me say this many, many times. We need the highest resolution. We need it now. We need it yesterday, and we need it every 15 minutes. I always exaggerate to say that we do need high resolution. We need to know the size, the area, the concentration. We need to know the best estimates of thickness, the stage of development, how old the ice is. We need to know the difference. Are we expecting high concentrations of hard glacial ice, multi-year ice, or is it all first-year ice, thin ice? We need to know, depending on the type of ship, if it's a heavy icebreaker, most of the more capable research icebreakers can toddle off into the ice quite happily and work within the ice. But the newer operators coming in, whether they be passenger, expedition, or cargo ships, don't have the ice strengthening. So knowing marginal ice zones, the extent of marginal ice zones is important. So having that information, it has to be timely. It can't be 2 to 3 days old. The ice moves even more quickly than it did in the past. We're seeing multi-year ice where we didn't see multi-year in the past. Greater danger to shipping. We're seeing glacial ice in the Beaufort Sea, which for years was an impossibility as far as ice navigators were concerned. But now glacial ice is showing up, allowed to move into the Beaufort with the lack of multi-year holding against the Canadian archipelago. So trying to come up with a one-size-fits-all, as has been said here, is not going to help us. We need to understand the range of abilities of people on ships, from very, very inexperienced to highly experienced. We need to have something simple and uniform for the least experienced people, but accurate. It needs to be timely and as regular as possible once a vessel is in an area. daily charts of a fairly high resolution small area are important, or the production and the dissemination of high resolution satellite imagery. Preference always is high resolution visual. Cloud cover rules that out. High resolution synthetic aperture. That's in most cases the gold standard. And after that, passive microwave and other systems. But we need to get those as quickly as possible on the ships to make those decisions before we catch ourselves. I hope that sort of lays it out to the group and to the room and sets us up for further conversation.
Thank you so much, Duke. Yeah, and we are basically setting the stage for the panel discussion. So, thank you, Duke, for joining us now, and I hope you will stay on until for the next 45 minutes or so. So, to complicate things, we have also lots of research going on in polar waters, and a variety of tools and tools are used for making that happen. So next on stage, I would like to invite Christian Haas from the Alfred Wegener Institute. You have been leading, I don't know how many polar expeditions, science programs in polar waters. So, and I believe that you also have to make decisions in advance, but also day-to-day decisions. And maybe you can bring us a few more details on how this process is actually working in daily life.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Kurt, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, a lot has been said, but maybe before I start, I wanted to introduce myself. As you heard, I'm Christian Haas. I'm a professor with the University of Bremen, actually. They value that very much and insist that I mention that any time. And I'm with the Alfred Wegener Institute. And as you know, we are the operators of the Polarstern, one of the still today best research icebreakers in the world. But I have not only sailed on the Polarstern, I have sailed on almost any ice-breaking research vessel for sure, and then other vessels as well, including the Odin. More importantly, maybe I was actually the chief scientist on the Kapitän Dranitsin in 2019 and 2020 when we resupplied the Polarstern in the middle of the polar night near the North Pole during the Mosaic experiment. And that was actually really interesting because on the one hand we sailed twice, once in December, once in March in the polar night without any daylight. And not only were we on a good icebreaker, the Dranitsin, but a bad open water ship. And actually crossing the Barents Sea was more of a challenge than crossing the sea ice because of the swell and the vulnerability of the ship for swell and all the containers that were stored in the front of the ship at the bow. And I was going to talk about ice, but because you mentioned weather, that's actually quite important as well. And then finally, and maybe very significantly too, recently I sailed on the Commodore Charcot, the French cruise ship that regularly goes to the North Pole during summer. And because we are using it for sea ice research, I have very close contacts to the bridge as well, and to how, very good insights into how they do their ice navigation. And that's, of course, an important step forward, and I hope I remember to talk about what kind of data and so they use. So I have to say, and I didn't say I'm actually a sea ice researcher. I call myself a sea ice geophysicist and remote sensing expert. And so I'm an ice seeker rather than an ice avoider. And I had the luxury to sail, on some of the most capable ice-going ships, and I've visited the North Pole many times. But I should also say that once in my life I sailed on a very small yacht in Nares Strait between Greenland and Ellesmere Island in Canada, and we were seeking the sea ice as well, and that didn't go so well. We were actually beset in the sea ice and helplessly drifting for 2.5 days past icebergs and through icebergs, and so So I see that side as well. But then also, of course, when we talk about ice information, it depends on your perspective, right? Is your main interest to be safe? And that is, of course, everyone's interest. But next comes in how much hurry are you? Because if you have time, then you can afford to be beset and can live without too much information. But if you're in the hurry, then of course you want to pass the ice as quickly as possible from A to B and need better information. Yeah, I wanted to say, and Duke has said everything. What are the key aspects? I mean, first of all, we must not forget that there's the difference between strategic planning, right, which is like the long-term forecast, laying out the general routes you want to sail, and on the Commodore Charcot, I can say this is what they do very much as well. They take and maybe they're obliged, I think, to use ice charts as well, but they mostly rely on passive microwave for that purpose. They do look carefully where is the ice edge, and they plan their route according to where the shortest distance is, and where they also do know based on experience and on common knowledge where is more first-year ice, where is more multi-year ice. So when they leave from Svalbard to the North Pole, they actually turn east quite a bit, almost to Franz Josef Land, and then from there they head north. And that's a clear example of strategic planning. And this is where also older data, and then of course synthesized data like the ice charts are relevant, but where the passive microwave ice concentration data, of course, also give you that day-to-day change and information about the variability. The other thing that's, of course, then important once you enter the ice is timeliness, as Duke said, because the ice moves, the ice changes very much, and because of that, it's timeliness on the one hand and high resolution. I can only echo everything he said. And I mean, what we also must realize is that there has been a revolution in bandwidth and capability of transfer huge data with Starlink, actually, mostly. It was really high resolution data was still critical when we all relied on Iridium, but now this is no problem anymore. And when I was on the sailing yacht, which is 15 years ago, there was no Starlink and poor Iridium. So we were lacking that high resolution information to escape the ice in that case. But so now the issue really is we can afford large data with high resolution. Actually, when you and the only as he rightly said, the only useful source really is radar data and SAR imagery. But they also do have a trade-off, because the higher resolution they get, the smaller swath sizes you get, the smaller image sizes, which requires that, and the tasking. So we mostly rely on Sentinel-1, obviously, who doesn't, but we also very closely work with our German colleagues from DLR, the German Aerospace Center, who operate the TerraSAR satellite. And that satellite does not take routine imagery, so the images have to be tasked, and they have to be tasked at least 24 hours in advance. And if you want high resolution, then the image coverage is actually very small, only a few tens of kilometers, depending on the product. And that means that 24 hours in advance, you also need to know where your position will be to get images that show yourself and the route ahead to be helpful. And so once you've got the imagery, then of course it's great once you're on them. But the next challenge is, of course, how do you visualize them? Because you need a geographical information system of sort, ideally integrated in your digital sea chart and all the other navigational aids, including the ship radar itself, to be able to use the information properly. And I think that there have been good advances as well. Everybody has their own pet system. On the Polarstern, we have, for many years, we have developed something that's called the map viewer that is able to ingest all sorts of geographical data, including the ship information, including weather forecasts, including ice drift forecasts, which is what I'm going to talk about next. And so this gives us, and it allows you to look backwards, so to flicker through the images to see the temporal development, the drift of the ice. That's very useful as a navigational aid. And then more recently, this has been taken by actually some grad students of mine who founded this company Drift and Noise, which some of you may have heard about, that also provides this app that collects all imagery and very conveniently provides them in a geographical information system with the position of your ship if it's connected to the GPS. However, even with that, the availability of SAR images is still insufficient on the one hand. Close to the North Pole in particular, but also farther south, like with the passing of the Sentinel-1B satellite. There's only one Sentinel-1 satellite at the moment. I think C has just been launched. The coverage of the Arctic was much reduced, and then they are focusing on the European Arctic mostly. RadarSat compensates some of that, but the high-resolution data is normally not available freely. And I'm only talking about freely available data, I have to say, yes. So even with that, this data often is not sufficient because, it doesn't come often enough, and because it's static while the ice moves. And so when you compare your ship's position, if you're sailing through a lead, then the radar image, because of the ice drift, obviously, the radar image shows that you're passing through an ice flow. And so very quickly, actually, I'm always amazed how quickly you lose any context of where you are, given that visibility is normally very poor as well, so you can't see very far, you can't make out prominent leads that are farther away. And so I think the next, if you're on a capable ship like the Charcot, it doesn't really matter, or they are also getting concerned. But the next big thing really is to include wind forecast and ice drift forecasts into your system. And this is something we are working on. So, and that again refers back to the meteorological data. So the next important thing really are wind forecasts, and then of course sea ice drift forecasts, depending on how freely the ice drifts. And to be able to implement that in your online system, to essentially shift the imagery, right, according to where the ice drift is shifting the ice, so that you have a real-time and real location information of your ship in the ice flows that have been shifted. And I think this is the next step that various organizations are taking. There was something else I wanted to say, but I leave it there for now.
Yeah, you can keep it. So, thank you very much. Thank you to all three panelists. So, and I would like to invite you to join the stage, and also you, Dina, and Duke. It would be fantastic if you were here in the room. The second best we can have is to have you online, so you're also part of the discussion here. So before we kick things off, we have prepared a selection of questions that we may be able to put up on the screen here. So, but while we wait for the questions, I would like to ask all three panelists any immediate reactions to what you just heard. I think. Still, where I would like to start is the training component. So, but maybe, Dina? Yeah.
I just had a few.
Yeah, so please.
I just had a few comments, actually, since it was really great to hear more from Duke and Christian. And I think, to kind of maybe set the stage for the discussion later, the four things I wanted to also touch on and drive home at some point further would be that AI actually was brought up, and this really should be treated as a third party, an actual entity, because when we talk about decision making, and then we talk about humans, we talk about information, but then we actually have now a third entity that we have to look at in and of itself as its own concept and how we work with it. And there's a whole range actually of new social science moving towards this, looking at social AI behavior as an actual entity in and of itself. So we shouldn't overlook that as another actor. And to the point about sea ice hazards, they're very different types. So it's not just, interaction with the ice or being beset, but there could be this anomalous motion, which is actually very dangerous and can cause collisions and so forth. So actually the sea ice hazard context is really different depending on the type of hazard and interaction with the ice, and can be very drastic also in terms of its impact and how fast it can really have the reaction to people in life and property. And that brings me to the point about the marginal ice zone that we should also touch on too. Like, this is also where it's most dynamic area and also the most dangerous in that way. So that's also a target of looking at that coupled interaction between ocean, sea, and ice and atmosphere. So let's keep that in mind too in terms of the different areas as well. And then lastly, we can talk about this further, but that point about free data is super critical, and also probably the point which will drive further apart users in terms of their ability to work with the ice if they don't have access to it. So often people that are there for fun don't have the ability to get sometimes a high resolution data that's not free. Do you have any comments?
No, thank you.
Duke, I cannot see if you have your hand raised, so please chime in if or when you would like to add something. So, but as you noted,
you.
Yeah, you're most welcome to.
If I may, there's one thing that Dina just said. People who want to be there for fun, that makes me shiver. It makes me shake. It scares the hell out of me. One of the problems that we do have now with changing conditions and popular press telling everyone how accessible it is the number of very, very inexperienced pleasure boaters and very inexperienced expeditioners who are coming into these regions totally unprepared and expecting to use free services that don't have the quality. It's an alarm bell for the agencies that have to be out there to fish them out of the water. I spent a great many years in the Coast Guard, and it wasn't a cruise ship that made me sleepless at night. It was a plethora of small vessels going strange places without the equipment. So that's why that going for fun puts alarm bells up for me. Christian talked about, very, very highly capable ice-breaking ships with extremely experienced officers and the high bandwidth capabilities. High bandwidth doesn't make a good ice navigator. It just gives someone the ability to look at something that they have no idea what they're looking at and make a bad decision. The training of the people, experience of the people operating the ship is extremely important. You could have the best product in the world and people misinterpret it if they don't have that experience on board the vessel.
Thank you, Duke. It's not a secret that you and I, we have worked together for a long time. And one of the things I like the way of you're working is that you give us a call at the ice service a month in advance. Okay, we're bringing a ship into this and that area. So that means that we have you in our mindset, we put you into the planning. Talking about these pleasure boats and other types of ships coming in, they just go and expect that they can get everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So planning well in advance, that's in my mind very important. You also brought up the training aspect, another key topic. So going through a 1 week polar code course doesn't give you're not going to be an ice navigator with years of experience taking that course. It's built over a very long time in very different environments on different ships, etc., etc., etc. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on this note, Duke.
Absolutely. There's a couple of quotes that I've often used in presentations. One of them was by a whaling captain in the 1800s who said it takes very, very special skills to sail a ship into Arctic waters. And he talked about 20 years of experience. more recently, the chief executive of a very, very experienced Nordic tanker company said it takes minimum 10 years to train ice masters, more time than it takes to train a brain surgeon, to gain the experience, to learn to recognize what you're looking at, how a ship operates. One of the ranges we get, our company operates on ships and vessels of every type, from small yachts up to massive Cape-size bulk ships operating in the ice. And we found that we can't take, say, an icebreaker captain and put that person on a thin-skinned bulk ship and expect that individual to operate the ship safely if they don't understand the differences between a ship that has 10 centimeters of steel as opposed to one that has 3 centimeters of steel. So the types of skills do not transfer directly across ship type and mission. The experience in understanding the ice does, but the ship handling and the utilization. As Christian says, do we want to go to the North Pole on the Commandant Charcot, or do we want to stay on the edges of the ice where it's safe? Those are two different types of ways of looking at things, but the information is still important.
Thank you, Duke. I think Christian has a comment, and then there's a question from the floor.
Excuse me, yes. I wanted to just add to, add to the concern about training that actually applies to the radar images as well. Radar images are extremely difficult to interpret, also because the signature of the ice isn't constant. It changes with, you know, the temperature of the ice, the wetness of the ice, the waves on the water, and things like that. And it is true that it requires, thank you, that it requires years of experience, I think, to be able to read the images and also to know what you can read into them and what you can't. And some of the signals are ambiguous, and even experienced people sometimes struggle to, you know, or disagree to clearly agree on what they're actually seeing. And that's one thing that you learn mostly, you know, not from theory indeed, but by being in the ice, by being out on the water, by comparing what you see with your eyes with what you see on your radar images. And I think, yeah, that is an important part of experience and how you can improve your navigation.
Absolutely, 100%.
There was a question from the floor.
Hi, yeah, it's a really interesting talk there. I just wanted to pick up on the point about AI and the human interaction there. 'Cause obviously, the human ice charting is incredibly important to have the person, the expert doing that, and the trained individuals. But I was just wondering, with all the developments in AI and there's, you know, apps being developed and so on, how you see that enhancing the human and the person that's doing the ice charting, and whether there's aspects of the process that an ice charter does that could be, you know, enhanced or you know, not replaced by AI, but how can we use AI tools in order to maximise the use of the data and that's being generated as well?
Do you have a comment? Otherwise, I have a comment. Yeah, okay. Yeah, AI and routine ice charting, we need it. Maybe not only AI, but we need smart technology to help us, because 20 years ago we were asking all satellite data providers, give us more data, give us more data. Now we're there, we have tons of data, and we want more, and we know more are coming in the coming years. That's absolutely fantastic. But our analysts, they have their limits. They cannot handle all the data that's rolling in to keep an eye on it, to produce the various products. So we need the smart technology to help us to do the data management, to do the ice analysis, And there are science groups around the globe that have worked with this challenge for years. And also at DMI, we have a science group working with AI in routine ice charting, combining passive microwave with synthetic aperture radar. And they worked on this for 7 years, and we are now testing it in day-to-day operations, simply to do direct comparisons between what comes out of AI and compare it with the daily sea ice analysis. That contains total ice concentration, partial concentration of states of development, and flow size. That's ultimately the end goal where we want to go. So I think I also mentioned in my presentation that we are bringing 10 satellites into the daily operations on various levels for various regions. And right now, the science algorithm that we have for AI is running on one satellite. So coverage is really a challenge. We need the update frequency. And Duke, I think also you, Christian, mentioned that timeliness. That's really critical. And that's where AI can help us to produce something fast and automated, 24 hours a day. That's really where we should take advantage of the new technology coming in. But we cannot forget the update frequency. And I think all three of you mentioned that the ice is constantly moving and is getting more and more dynamic with the climate change that we are seeing. So that means that operating near the ice or in the ice, we require more frequent updates. Not just frequent updates, we also need to have short-term forecasts on see how things are going to go over the next tidal circle, for example. So where will the drift take us? Those type of things. So it's work in progress, but I also have confidence that it's coming in. But we need to learn how to work with the AI products. We need to be confident about the potential, what they can do, but also what is not doable with these products. For example, testing them near the ice sets in situations with rough weather, different seasons where we're having meltwater on top of the ice. So that type of thing, and that's the ongoing work at the ice service at the moment. So I think I've talked enough, but thank you for raising the question. That's excellent.
Hello. Maybe just adding to that, one other application is route forecasting, right? I think where there's increasing use of AI. I think there will be talks tomorrow about it.
Thank you for the great information. I'm curious, I think sometimes we fall into the trap of, when we talk about the Arctic, about assuming that it's homogeneous. I'm wondering if you're taking into account the differences in the European Arctic, the North American Arctic, even the North American East and West Arctic, the Russian Arctic, in all of this, the types of decisions that the operators are going to need, the availability, reliability, accuracy of the data that you're getting. How does all of that factor into the work that you're doing?
I think we should give the question to Christian or Duke, because you spent tons of time on ships operating in very different regions, and needs and requirements are very different. So maybe you can add a comment, or maybe you, Duke, you said you're going to the Antarctic in a few weeks' time.
Absolutely, and again, Kjeld and I and Penny, we've known each other for a number of years, and I've become a repetitive record on this one. But we have seen a massive standardization over the last decade or so. If we look at the Arctic, as the questioner just pointed out, whether it be the Russian, American, Canadian, Danish, Norwegian, whatever service we're getting, if we're relying on ice charts, a standardization of ice charts is very, very helpful. When you go from service to service, from geographic region to geographic region, to have widely disparate types of charts is very challenging. You've got to change your whole thought process on colors and graphics on what they mean. Nowadays, we get a very, very good standardization between CIS, Canadian Ice Service, Danish and Norwegian. Americans are a little bit in their own world still. but they're getting more in line with the I'll call the North American, European Arctic. Russia continues to do a very, very unique way of doing their ice charts. The background behind it, I mean, the imagery is the same no matter who gets it. It's how it's being interpreted by the various different ice centers and their skills. In general, I think that Transarctic, all the ice services are doing very, very admirable job of interpreting and presenting information, getting it to us. But I see, or I foresee a potential diversion outward if AI is not developed communally across the board. If each of the centers or each of the nations selects a different AI system that's going to interpret differently, which in my user aspect would say that's going to be good for AI, but it's not going to be good for us because the products will begin to diverge again. That is my concern with AI, is a divergence of product. We may get them more frequently, which is important, but if they're not being developed through the AI system on the same algorithms and the same methodologies, that divergence can become dangerous.
Duke, I think in the ice services, we're also aware of the challenge you mentioned here. And I can say that in the North American ice service, we are working with this. We are working on bringing AI projects together simply just to have a better joint understanding what is coming out. We are not there with how are things how are AI-based products going to look at the very end, because we need to do this stepwise. It's important that we have a very detailed understanding what is coming out of this black box called AI. How does it work?
Yes.
What
Yes.
What are the limitations? Are there certain situations where you cannot use it? For example, when you're having rough seas, that type of things. So we are working on this internally. We're working on this with international colleagues. So we have a stepwise approach to this, because it's very important that the marine community they are confident, they know what they get, because a product may make sense in a science context, but you're going to use it in a very hostile environment to make sound decision, and that's basically what all this session is about: how to make the decision, how do you trust the product, what is needed to trust the product, what is needed to make you so you can do the right decision on going from point A to point B in ice-covered waters.
If I can add on that just a second, one of the things that I also do is that I act as a subject matter expert in insurance arbitration, marine insurance arbitration, and looking at incidents in ice damage and that sort of thing. And one of the things that has come up recently is different sides of an arbitration may be using different ice information in an ice damage report. And it's been very interesting to be in the middle of a discussion where here's a product that DMI has produced that we're using, and here's a product that a commercial weather service has produced based only on passive microwave. And the side that says, well, here is an ice chart produced by weather service so-and-so, it says this, but was totally different than the actual ice conditions. So an AI-generated ice chart, as an example, is being used in one case, and the quality and the accuracy of that chart is very low. The product, not just because you're in the room staring at the monitor killed, but the product from DMI has individuals who are trained analysts and producing a very, very well-defined chart. Until we get that AI to that point that you're talking about where North American Ice Services worked out, I like what you said. What's coming out of the black box? Is it good stuff? Is it real? Is it accurate? Where I'm the old-fashioned guy right now that trusts the analysts a little bit better to produce a chart than AI at this point.
That's exactly the exercise that we're going through for the next 8 months, evaluating various seasons, and we're bringing in the ice analysts because they are the real experts. So okay, they know how to describe a certain ice situation, and how does AI output actually compare with this. So this side-by-side comparison is important. But I think Dina has another comment here.
Yeah, and then I just wanted to, ride that wave, literally, from the black box. And this goes back to the point that I was talking about trust, right? That also when we present a product, when we also talk about AI as a black box, it also often creates some, discomfort with the users as, can I actually trust this if you guys are framing it as the experts as a black box? So I think also the way that we discuss products that are AI, both internally but also externally, will have impact on also users' trust, irregardless of the product's, actual accuracy or not. So that's something, as I mentioned, that treating AI as its own entity and thinking about how we frame it and how we discuss it and how people use it and how it also uses information about its own products will be kind of a really important research direction in the years to come, independent of the research on AI-driven products. And that goes back a bit to the point about the different contexts and how there's different situational and needs across the Arctic. And this is about the point about the different types of hazards. For example, we have a lot more in Greenland, Alaska and Greenland, these land-fast ice breakout events where people are actually on the ice that breaks out. We don't see that in the Norwegian Arctic because we don't have inhabited communities around, and therefore that search and rescue operation on sea ice is very different than people that may be on a boat, for example. So I think this could also be a way that we could consider, for example, some different ways of personalizing then sea ice forecasts using AI to meet those different contextual needs. But that goes back again to the whole trust process, right? Do people then, if they know this warning is coming from an AI source, will they trust it, or would it be better if it's coming from, something that's been validated by an analyst? But this really brings up the concern because often as national governments, we're really mandated, as Penny had said, to produce this information, so we move a bit slower. We need to make sure that what we're doing is in accordance with regulations and agreements, but that's not stopping others, especially the private companies and research, independent of these institutions, to develop. So even if we're in this room being a bit more conservative, there will be others out there who are pushing those boundaries already and putting information out. And this will then cause a disservice in some sense to the users, because who do they trust in the end if they know that, this is coming from multiple different sources? So there's also a bit this regulatory framework, and it would really be great for IMO and other organizations to put out a more kind of discussion about accountability if someone were to use such information, and also who, putting it out from a forecast perspective, actually has that ownership that this could be used in contexts that have catastrophic potentially consequences.
Penny, you had a...
But to follow Dina's question, actually, I would like Christian and Duke, could you also comment on the follow-up on trusted sources and what she said about trusted sources and how you would uptake new products given the limitations of...
I can see the concern, although I have to say I have never thought about it so much, because with my experience, we prefer to use raw data and to do the interpretations ourselves. And then, even if they're freely available, of course, where you get the trustworthy raw data information from. But maybe on a more broader view, even with the trusted sources, there's different algorithms of how you compute ice concentration from the raw passive microwave brightness temperatures, and there are discussions and disputes about which one gives you the best information and whose ice edge you can trust the most. So it's not only AI. But I think, and again, this is like, the validation. I mean, you always have to validate, of course. You can't trust any information, not even the radar images, because you may misinterpret them. And so at any time you have to validate them with what you see. And I think this is very important for AI as well.
Maybe we can have a short comment from Duke on your view on trusted data and trusted data sources.
I certainly have to echo what Christian was saying. On the more capable ships with the more experienced crews, we prefer to have that raw data. We like to have that high resolution synthetic aperture radar. We like to have the good visual satellite imagery. That is our preference because we're making the call. The second to that, though, is we certainly do have, over years, a grasp of trust and trust levels for the different organizations. I've said it here today already. DMI, Keld, your charts, Norwegian charts, Canadian charts, tend to be very, very high quality, very, very accurate. Conservative because that's what's expected. You build in a conservative level of interpretation for safety. But we begin to lose that same level of trust. Sorry if I insult somebody here, but over in the American side and on the Russian charts, Baltic charts are incredibly good. You've got nations working together producing charts fairly rapidly. Where the trust really drops right now is with the commercial service providers who are more often inaccurate in their interpretation of ice from whatever sources they've got. And those are the commercial weather routing services. They put out charts that give you ice updated every 6 hours in some cases. But is that an actual every 6 hours, or is it just a different shift? Their ice edges tend to be inaccurate. Their concentrations are wildly inaccurate. But they're really nice because they come out every 6 hours. Isn't that exciting? But they're wrong. So what good are they?
Yeah.
The level of their AI capability isn't up to the point yet. So as much as I would like, Keld, for your team to put out a chart every 12 hours, I understand that's just not going to happen. But when we do get a chart from you or from Penny or Canadian Ice Service, we know that it's going to be as accurate as it can be. It's that faith and trust that Dina talked about, built over years.
Yeah. On that note, we want to improve to see what are the commercial providers actually doing. But you both mentioned timeliness. That's really important, and that's one of the aspects that we would like to bring in with this new technology. But we cannot just leave the other parameters because confidence is really, really important. So we are about to close this session, so you will have a 20-second closing statement.
I think that was a really great point, Duke, that you made, and I just want to put out there that even though, we are talking about that the inaccuracy exists, but people use it still. Yeah. So that's something we really have to still keep in mind, that even though we are really making sure that people have high confidence in our data, this other data exists, it's being used, and it's part of the landscape. So that should also be a dialogue, that we don't shut that door and figure out why they use it, even though it may be inaccurate.
Yeah, thanks. And a closing statement from Christian?
Maybe, those who know me a bit better, is I'm actually an expert in ice thickness measurements. But I have to say that, and alluding to what I said earlier, ice thickness and ice type and all these things are actually not that important. What matters really is ice concentration and the change of the ice. And when the ice closes, then what matters the most is the pressure of the ice, which depends on the winds primarily. And so if we want to improve the use of ice information, I think we have to work on the drift and ice pressure forecasting or analysis too. And that also relates to the regional question. You know, if you're close to land, then that is much more critical than if you're out on the open Arctic Ocean, where there are no constraints to the ice drift.
Thank you. And last but not least, Duke Snyder, Martic Polar, do you have a closing statement?
Absolutely. We want the highest resolution possible, down to 50 centimeters. We want it every hour, and we want it 100% accurate.
Okay. In the ice service, we hear what you say, and we'll do our best. So first of all, a very big thank you to our panelists. So I think we should give them a hand. And it's 10 o'clock, so we have to close this session, but I believe that the discussions will continue in the corridors in the coffee break. So thank you so much for joining us here. And Duke, again, thank you so much for joining. It's in the middle of the night in your place, so you have deserved a good night's sleep, and I believe also a drink to make that happen. So thank you so much. We'll close here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a new process.
I'm working on Nancy.
Oh yeah.
I'm here for the Maritime conference, or you guys came for the volunteers? No, I came today and tomorrow. Yeah.
Oh,
I live in Tromsø, so I'm one of the local hosts.
oh, okay. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. That's good. Did you have a good time with the Youth Conference?
Yeah, I love it. It's so fun.
Oh, I love it. 3,000 participants.
I didn't know, but it was packed.
Looking forward to today.
Yeah. I just love that.
Have a lot of speaking engagement.
This is my fourth and last engagement. And so after this, I think I'm just gonna chill for a little
You have
bit.
to really chill.
I might go to the sauna.
Yeah, it's a good idea. To brave enough and have a deep also.
I went to the volcano spa. Oh my gosh, it was amazing.
I remember I was hosting like 30 guests from Nordic, and in Canada they had this program called Nordic Bridges. And so I think the maiden edition brought 30 of the persons here in Tromsø. And there was no active frontier, so they had a lot of time to see around.
Yeah.
I think that was the best year that they opened Buchanan, and I took them to Buchanan. That was their best experience.
Yeah, that was, I spent like 2.5 hours.
I cannot control it. I mean, I can, but I mean,
And then they had lunch, and then they had a jacuzzi up, and then some of them wanted to jump on out, they could jump into the ocean, and come back in. After that year, they did that. It was a good experience.
That was, I didn't even know that existed. It's just that.
yeah, I mean,
So there was an alternate.
I was like, this is another kind of thing. I was like, it's a little more expensive, and I got there and I was like, I'm just crying. Okay, it's fine.
Sometimes in the summer it actually moves, So you can also book like this group, you can book like
thank you very much.
2 hours of tour.
One of the speakers, the organizer is over there. Yeah. Are you speaking as well? Are you speaking as well? Are you participating in the session? Okay. Hi, how are you doing, guys? Hi, Hannah. Very nice. No, we did not, but I've seen your name many times. I think you were together on the session with my boss, Mats.
Oh, yeah. That was like
Arctic Circle.
somewhere. Yes. Okay.
So we haven't met, but we did meet.